I've always loved the quiet. It's one of the reasons I moved to Hollow Creek, a place so isolated it doesn't even appear on most maps. Nestled between thick, ancient forests and surrounded by mountains, the town is cut off from the rest of the world. Cell service is spotty at best, and the nearest town is a good 45 minutes away by car. But I didn't mind. After the chaos of city life, Hollow Creek seemed like the perfect place to start over, to finally find some peace. It's strange, looking back now, to think that peace was what I found at first. The townsfolk were welcoming enough, if a little reserved. They didn't pry into why a woman in her late 30s would suddenly decide to move to such an isolated place, which I appreciated. My new neighbors were friendly in their own way, offering help when needed but mostly keeping to themselves. It suited me just fine. The house I bought was a small, old-fashioned cottage on the edge of town, with a stone path leading to a dense patch of forest. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Abernathy, had passed away the year before, and the house had sat empty ever since. It was in good condition, considering its age, and I found myself quickly falling in love with its quaint charm. The creaky wooden floors, the stone fireplace, even the slightly crooked windows gave it character. It felt like a place where time had stood still, untouched by the outside world. For the first few months, life in Hollow Creek was everything I'd hoped it would be. I spent my days gardening, exploring the nearby woods, and indulging in my love of painting. The serenity of the place seeped into my soul, slowly washing away the stress and anxiety that had plagued me for so long. It was like a dream, a quiet, peaceful dream that I never wanted to end. But then, as the days grew shorter and the first signs of autumn began to appear, things started to change. It was subtle at first. I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Soft, shuffling footsteps, as if someone was walking through the fallen leaves. Each time I heard them, I would bolt out of bed and rush to the window, but there was never anyone there. The footsteps would stop the moment I looked outside, leaving only the rustling of leaves in the wind. I tried to tell myself it was just animals or my imagination playing tricks on me, but the unease gnawed at me. One night, the footsteps were louder, closer. I could hear them right outside my bedroom window, slow and deliberate. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible scratching against the window pane. It was so faint that I wondered if I was imagining it, but the sound continued, steady and deliberate. Something was out there, just on the other side of the glass, scratching. I finally mustered the courage to get out of bed and look. My heart was pounding in my chest as I pulled back the curtain, expecting to see something, anything. But there was nothing. Just the darkness of the night and the faint outline of trees in the distance. The scratching stopped the moment I looked out, leaving only the eerie silence. The next morning, I checked the window from outside, but there were no marks, no signs of anything having been there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I tried to push the thoughts aside. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me, that I needed to get out more, socialize with the locals. But every time I left the house, I couldn't help but feel like someone, or something, was watching me from the shadows. The incidents became more frequent as the days went by. I would find things in the house out of place. My keys moved from the kitchen counter to the living room. The front door left slightly ajar when I was certain I had locked it. Once, I came home to find all the windows wide open, despite having closed them before I left. The strangest part was that nothing was ever missing or broken. It was as if someone had been in my house, just to move things around and leave. One evening, as I was returning home from a trip to the town's tiny grocery store, I saw something that sent chills down my spine. It was just after sunset, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple. As I turned onto the narrow road leading to my house, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. A figure standing at the edge of the woods. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, But as I slowed down to get a better look, the figure became clearer. It was a person, or at least it looked like one, standing completely still, just at the edge of the trees. They were wearing what appeared to be old, tattered clothes, and their face was obscured by shadows. I couldn't make out any features, but I had the overwhelming sense that they were watching me. My heart raced as I sped up, trying to put as much distance between myself and that figure as possible. When I finally reached my house, I didn't dare look back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made my skin crawl. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, something I couldn't explain. The following day, I decided to go for a walk in the woods to clear my head. The forest had always been a place of solace for me, a place where I could escape the worries of everyday life. But as I walked deeper into the trees, the familiar path seemed different, darker somehow. The trees, which had once felt welcoming, now loomed over me like silent sentinels, their branches twisting in unnatural ways. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it. The soft, shuffling footsteps behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I froze, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped when I did, but the air was thick with a palpable tension, as if something was waiting just out of sight. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The path behind me was empty, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I could feel eyes on me, burning into the back of my head. I spun around, ready to run, but my foot caught on something, and I stumbled, falling to the ground. As I pushed myself up, I noticed what had tripped me, a small old-fashioned doll, half buried in the dirt. It was the kind of doll that might have been loved by a child decades ago, with a faded, hand-stitched dress and glass eyes that stared blankly at nothing. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. I hadn't seen it there before, and I'd walked this path countless times. I picked up the doll, turning it over in my hands. It felt wrong, somehow, like it didn't belong here. The fabric was damp, and the stitching was loose, as if it had been left out in the elements for years. But what struck me the most was the expression on its face. Its features were twisted into a grimace, almost as if it was in pain. I dropped the doll and backed away, my mind racing. I had to get out of there. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back at the house, breathless and trembling. I locked the door behind me, double-checking the locks and closing all the windows. I tried to calm myself, but the feeling of dread was suffocating. That night, the footsteps outside my window were louder than ever. They started just after midnight, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth. I lay in bed, clutching the blankets to my chest, too terrified to move. The scratching at the window returned, this time more insistent, as if something was trying to get in. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see what it was. I forced myself out of bed and approached the window, my hands shaking. I pulled back the curtain, expecting to see the same empty yard as before. But this time, there was something there. Just beyond the glass, a figure stood in the darkness, their face pressed against the window. The features were distorted, almost inhuman, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, its breath fogging up the glass. I ran to the door, fumbling with the lock in my panic. I had to get out of the house, had to get away from whatever that thing was. But as I threw open the door, I was met with a wall of darkness. The outside world had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable blackness that seemed to swallow everything. I slammed the door shut and backed away, my mind reeling. I was trapped. There was no way out. The figure at the window was still there, its eyes following my every move. The footsteps inside the house started then, slow and deliberate, echoing through the halls. Whatever was outside had gotten in. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced as I searched for something, anything that could help me. I grabbed the fireplace poker, holding it in front of me like a weapon. But deep down, I knew it. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear them moving down the hallway, towards my bedroom. I backed into a corner, gripping the poker tightly, trying to steady my breathing. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the door creaked open, slowly, as if whatever was on the other side was savoring the moment. I couldn't see anything beyond the darkness, but I could feel it, feel the presence that had invaded my home. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the sound of soft, shuffling footsteps as the presence entered the room. The air grew cold, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The darkness seemed to pulse, growing thicker, more suffocating. Then, from the shadows, a voice whispered, so faint I almost didn't hear it. "You don't belong here." The words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The presence moved closer, and I could feel it now. Feel the cold breath on my skin. The darkness pressed in around me, suffocating, crushing. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was wait for whatever was coming. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the darkness lifted. The footsteps stopped, and the air grew warm again. The presence was gone, leaving only the silence behind. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The room was empty, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something had been here, something that wasn't human. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner, too terrified to move. I didn't sleep, didn't dare close my eyes. The darkness felt alive, like it was waiting for me to let my guard down. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the window, I forced myself to move. I had to leave, had to get out of Hollow Creek before whatever was in the house came back. I grabbed my keys and ran to the car, not bothering to pack anything. I didn't care. I just needed to escape. The drive to the next town felt like a blur, my mind racing with everything that had happened. I didn't stop until I reached a small motel on the outskirts of the next town. I checked in and locked myself in the room, finally allowing myself to breathe. For days, I stayed in that motel, too afraid to go back to Hollow Creek. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my house was haunted. That something in the darkness was trying to kill me. They'd think I was crazy. I finally mustered the courage to return to the house. But when I got there, it was as if nothing had happened. The house was exactly as I had left it, with no signs of the strange events from before. The windows were intact, the door was locked, and there were no footprints outside. It was as if the house had swallowed up the nightmare and left no trace. But I couldn't stay there. I packed up what little I had and left Hollow Creek for good, never looking back. I moved to a new town far away and tried to forget what had happened. But no matter how hard I try, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me, that the darkness is still out there, watching, waiting. Every now and then, I hear footsteps outside my window, soft and deliberate, and I know it's still out there. I don't know what it wants or why it's after me, but I know one thing for sure. In the silence of Hollow Creek, something evil lurks, something that should never be disturbed. And now, it's waiting for me to let my guard down.